all it'll take. It's good. It's 45 minutes. And it's a interview process, not a debate. And Ted and I are part of the editorial board, as is Dan Miller. Sam Marvin is not. He's just here as an observer. And others may join us, but probably not. Probably the three of us. So you got the 18 first off in terms of the editorial board, okay? Yeah. That's a joke. Probably not 18.
This is Memphis. I expect 18.
Yeah, oh, I like you already. Okay, that's good. That's a good answer. But that wasn't a question.
You sure? I want bonus points. Wait a minute.
That's it. Yeah, nothing to get. No, this, all jokes aside, this is the process we're going to use. I'm going to start off with some basic questions. The first one is going to be, as I think I put in a note to all of you, why are you running for the District 2 office, and what would you do in the office? And in your case, of course, it's running again. And you get 2 minutes to answer that question. And then we will launch in, each of you gets to answer it. And I'm going to go alphabetically, so I'm going to start with John, and then we're going to start you. This is the way it is right here. Boom. C, E, and W. I'm good to go. And then we will go into questions. And every question we ask, you can all answer it if you want. If you don't want to answer it, you don't have to answer it. But we will ask you a question, but then John and Marvin get to answer the same question as well, because they're very general questions. And at the very end, we're going to have another question that gives you a chance to do a closing statement. And I'll tell you what that is up front, and I'll explain it to you once more at the end. It's going to be, what have you learned about yourself and your city from this race? Okay. So once I get the heads up, we're ready to start. And again, I'm going to go alphabetically, so I'm going to start with Frank. So welcome to the District 2 endorsement interview process from the City Council. You're with the Commercial Appeal Editorial Board. I'm Mark Russell. And Frank, I want to ask you this question, and of course it goes all across the way here. Why are you running for the office? Of course you're running for re-election, and what do you hope to do if you win?
Well, first things first, thank y'all for having us. The great part about elections is it's an open sharing of ideas, and it's what I like to think of as the arena of ideas. I'm a lifelong Memphian. As a matter of fact, with the exception of college, I'm a lifelong resident of District 2. I've been involved all my life, many different things like Land Use Control Board, Board of Adjustment, Boys and Girls Clubs. But what I found when I ran 4 years ago is I felt like Memphis was floundering and not progressing forward the way it could and should. I was fortunate enough to win and represent District 2 for the last 4 years. I think the strongest pieces that I'm most proud of is we've had 4 years of balanced budgets. We've had 4 years of no tax increases. In 4 years, we've been able to recruit and hire over 400 new police officers. We're at, by the end of this year, a projected net 200, which puts us halfway to our goal of 2,300 police officers. We have doubled our asphalt budget. As everybody knows, potholes, all 100,000 of them a year that we fill, are a scourge. We've doubled that budget and spent over $80 million in the last 4 years. We found in certain ways that our trash subcontractor in Cordova wasn't working out. The mayor and I personally worked and found with CFO Shirley Ford the $14 million to fire that contractor and bring on a new one and get trash under control in Cordova. So you have potholes, you have trash, you have public safety. When you get to the budget and the hard work that we've done, it is my belief that Memphis has $1 billion worth of things we should work on. The fact and the reality is that we only have $700 million, and with public safety being about 2/3 of that budget, we have to make some very strong and tough decisions. Now, instead of just looking at the $700 million we do have, let's talk about development. All my life as a 4th generation landscape contractor, I've been in construction. That's the only real world I know. So when it comes to planning and development, when we talk about growing Memphis up and not out, I have led the charge and been chairman of the Planning and Zoning Committee on all these developments coming forward that require some degrees of heavy government involvement and assistance, like a Union Road. A $500 million investment in development is going to create thousands of jobs. And then there are other projects coming up on Poplar, per se, that aren't necessarily requiring strong government assistance. So it is that balance of finding the budget, but in turn promoting positive, strong development that turns around and lifts all of Memphis up so that our tax base naturally increases without a tax increase.
Hold that thought, because we'll come back to economic development in a few, but
Let's go to the next 4 years and what we hope.
you've exceeded your 2 minutes.
Okay,
Come
thank you.
back to you, okay?
All right, thank you.
John, your turn.
I guess a big reason why I'm running, why I'm even bothering to do this, is that I don't really agree with those that say that the city is moving in a positive direction, that we have momentum, that we're moving towards things as they should be. Now, I'm not really your average candidate. I can go through a laundry list of things that should be disqualifying. I'm on the autism spectrum. I've dealt with depression and anxiety. I've survived an abusive marriage. I've seen the inside of a jail cell. I have a bit of a history of protesting and rabble-rousing. But at the end of the day, I decided that we need voices from normal, ordinary working people. We need voices of people who understand what it is to have your MLGW cut off. We need voices from people who understand what it is to make $7 an hour. We need voices from people who understand what it is to have to rely on a bus that takes 60 minutes to get where you are and another 2 hours to get where you're going in order to survive. We need people who understand these struggles in positions of power. Now, I don't have anything personally against members of the current administration, Mr. Colvett included. They're all wonderful people, I'm sure. But I see the policies that are being laid out. And it's a policy of increased policing, over-policing, I would say, a policy of austerity, of cutting services, of cutting the very things that bring people out of poverty at a time when our city is one of the poorest in the nation and has historically been one of the poorest in the nation for my entire adult lifetime. So what I am proposing is a change of direction, an operation from new presuppositions, new models of thinking about what our city is and what it can become. Thank you.
Okay. Mark?
Thank you also for having me. I guess I sit a little bit in the middle between Frank and John on why I'm running. Much like a lot of the issues that John talked about, I came from those situations. I'm a native Memphian, but I didn't grow up in District 2. District 2 is one of the most affluent districts in the city of Memphis. We didn't start there. We started out, I started out in a single family home. My mother, a nurse, took care of me. My father wasn't around much. I grew up in a scenario where all the odds were stacked up against me. I was a black boy in Memphis. But my mother worked really hard to make sure that I had a great education, that I worked hard, and I believed in myself. From there, I met a crossroads when I was a teenager. I had a chance to either make the right choices or the wrong choices. And the choices I made were not to run the streets and engage in all those activities that were so close to me. I decided to focus on my academics, and even in high school, I decided I'd run for senior class president. So at Whitehaven High School, I was elected senior class president. That's really where the bug started for me. And since then, I've always eyed a political position, a position of influence within city government. But what I've been seeing lately is one of a lot of self-serving policies that drive out people. And when I made the choice to stay here in Memphis for school at the University of Memphis, to work at AutoZone and at FedEx, I decided that it was important that I have an influence in the city. So I made a commitment to some colleagues of mine back in 2013 that I would do my part to help this city by standing up and running for office. And what I've seen since then has been really an amazing turnabout where folks have really shared and poured out all of the ills that they've seen, particularly within District 2. By District 2 being so affluent, you would think they have a good life, and there are a lot of good things about it. But those folks work really hard to keep what they have, and to have people walk up and take it, and there to be slow response to it, where trash is rampant everywhere. I was this morning at a house where trash had been strewn over the yard. The neighbors were in an uproar, and I got a call. And the property owner showed up, and he was shaken up by what he had seen. The tenants were just unruly. They had been running some type of operation out of his house, and he's a good property owner. And it's not enough attention on those types of things, and the community just doesn't know what to do. So the community.
I want to pause you there.
Sure.
And I want to pick up on something I think all of you have kind of touched on this, particularly John and Marvin, and that is that though you are running in an relatively affluent district, the city is not affluent. In fact, the city has a poverty rate nearly 39% among children, one of the highest in the nation, if not the highest. Part of the city residents live in poverty, as you pointed out, John. As council members, and if you're reelected, Frank, as council member, how could you reverse those trends, those numbers, and address generational poverty? What can the council do? What kind of things could you do? And I want to flip it now, since you started the opening statement. I'll flip it to go backwards in terms of alphabet W to Z.
Sure. Thank you. So, first of all, I think I'm probably one of the most qualified to answer that question, because I was one of those children. And it was education. That was the root cause to the solution. It was really that focus and dedication to making sure that I'm pumping myself with information, with knowledge, and being able to apply that in real world settings. I support funding for education, which this council has not done. I understand that there are budget constraints, but we need to find ways. We need to start turning over every rock to address the root cause of the issue, which I strongly believe is education. It impacts property value. It's tied to crime. It's tied to so many of our ills, and it's really a black eye for Memphis, and has been for decades. And we have a way to address it. I think I support this new superintendent. He's putting in some really good initiatives, and the lowest performing students right now, unfortunately, are African American males. And those are the students that we've taken our hands off of. And those are the ones we really need to wrap our arms around. And we've got to find ways to put some more programs in place to support those kids at their youngest.
John, same question. If at any point anybody needs me to repeat a question, I will do my best to repeat it the same way.
No, certainly.
You got it?
So, like I was talking earlier about taking different presuppositions, I operate from a bit of a different perspective. For one, I'm an outspoken socialist. I'm a member of the local chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm actually the outgoing co-chair of the organization. And to my mind, poverty is a result of a lack of economic sovereignty. When I say economic sovereignty, I mean normal people having control over their economic lives. I'll give an example that hit my district particularly hard. I think all of y'all are familiar with the 2008 financial crisis and the ensuing foreclosure crisis. The foreclosure crisis led to one of the largest losses of black wealth in Memphis that has occurred in American history. We took Wells Fargo to court over it. These banks were accused of redlining. These banks were accused of reverse redlining, i.e. giving minority subprime loans in order to get them to borrow more, and other tactics meant to extract wealth from our communities, either through inflated mortgage payments or through the properties themselves. Home ownership is a huge deal to me. Business ownership is a huge deal to me. As a socialist, I am a fan of worker-owned businesses and cooperatives. I believe that people should have sovereignty both in the governmental sphere and the economic sphere, to have control over what they spend so much of their lives on, work. And from that sovereignty, in turn, comes economic benefit. We live under what I like to call shareholder capitalism. And under shareholder capitalism, unfortunately, business and indeed the larger economy is run for the benefit of those who hold shares. I don't see too many people in North Memphis, South Memphis, Westwood, out in Raleigh. I don't see too many people holding shares out there. And so these people don't have ownership of their economic life. So that's my perspective on poverty. Poverty is a function of economic sovereignty, being able to control the output of your labor and the work you're doing with you and those in your community.
Thank you, John.
I think you'd like the ESOPs, a lot of the landscape firms you go into. I was a co-sponsor and helped lead the charge on the pre-K through 3 education. It's a clear fact that if children do not read on a 3rd grade level by 3rd grade, the odds of them graduating and being able to compete in the workforce, literally the odds are completely stacked against them. As we all know, the charter was surrendered on schools. The county controls that. The county funds that. The city council did not have to engage that question, but we knew we needed to. We knew we needed to participate. I was proud to sponsor that. I also think that we're not pushing our tech schools. One of the greatest things is our governor and our state government are paying for our kids to get out of high school and learn how to be an airplane mechanic, start off at $60,000 a year plus at FedEx. My industry, construction, you could start at $45,000 plus just going to tech school for free. We're not pushing that hard enough, but it came on our watch as we tied in with the governor. Last but not least, let's talk about jobs. When you talk about economic development of growing up and growing out, remember the billions in development that have happened in just the last 4 years and 24,000+ jobs that have been created. I hope we talk about MATA some, because at the end of the day, education is vital. But if we're not educating our children and then giving them an opportunity to take that education and have a good living and get to their job, then we're doing it wrong. We have to do both. And so far in 4 years, we've done exactly that. I represent District 2, and on the landlord question, understand, I'm the one bringing forward the legislation that will make all landlords have to register. The problem we're running into in Cordova is that many properties are being abused by the owners who are paper corporations in Delaware. And every time we try to drag them to environmental court or we try to kick those bad residents out, we're running into forever blocks because we can't get the owners to do the right thing. So one of the things in Cordova that we're working particularly hard on, and it's going to be my focus the next 24 months, is this registry to make sure that we want you to come to Memphis, we want you to live and succeed here, but at the same time, the outside corporations need to do the right thing. So when it comes to education, we didn't have to engage, but we did. When it comes to jobs, we're creating them. When it comes to MATA, we're going to work to get them there, but when it comes also to living and having a good environment and a good neighborhood, we're on top of it. Again, we canceled the trash contract just for that.
Thank you. Ted?
Tell me a little bit more about economic development, how you see, what you would like to see develop in Memphis over the next 4 years, starting with Marvin.
Okay. So from an economic development perspective, there is a little dirty secret that Memphis has been harboring for decades as well. We have a large number of African American owned businesses, but the majority of them are single member owned businesses. They don't have the ability to scale up or accept any of the contracts, which has been woefully allocated to MWBEs. And we've got to address that immediately. I know the city administration has been making some efforts and strides to do that, but they just haven't been effective enough to really move the needle. We've got to put some programs in place to really address making sure that Black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and other minority-owned businesses are able to thrive in this environment. With all of the new development coming into downtown, midtown area, and very little in the outskirts beyond that, we got to make sure that those allocations are holding on to making sure that we're keeping those MWBs engaged. We have to move the needle in a significant manner. If we're not really addressing this issue and being intentionally diverse with economic development, we're really failing this city. And as a city council member, if elected, I'd make it one of my top priorities to make sure that we are reaching out to these business owners and finding out how we can help them scale up, how that they can get the training they need, the resources they need, the funding they need to be able to compete in this marketplace. It is one of the top things that will drive this city forward. If we want to see progress in Memphis, we need to diversify intentionally and make sure that that development is driven into many areas of the city, not just a few.
John.
So, to riff on what Mr. White said, going back to the idea of economic sovereignty, minority-owned businesses are a huge way for us to build economic sovereignty in our communities, have ownership of our communities. I pal around with another gentleman who's running for city council in Super District 8, Frank Johnson. And one big piece of Frank Johnson's stump speech talks about how in the 80s, his neighborhood was full of black-owned small businesses that provided the needs of the community, kept the community's money within the community. And then large corporations came in, got rid of those small businesses, and then as you've seen with like the Kroger's pulling out of South Memphis, those large corporations in turn, if they're not going to be able to make a dollar, will pull out. And that is the dark side of this so-called investment. No one invests money if they don't expect a profit from it. These are not gifts from the heavens. These are not philanthropy. When people build a giant development, they do so with the expectation that they're going to make money from it. I want to take a bit of a different approach. I want to pour money into things like community land trusts to give people sovereignty over the land underneath their homes. I want to do things like, for instance, regulate out-of-town landlords. 20% of the single-family homes sold in Memphis last year were sold to out-of-town investors. People my age, the millennial generation, we're being priced out of home ownership. I am 35 years old and renting. I'm not particularly happy about that statistic. So, you know, if we go back to economic development, if people own their communities, if we have development of small businesses, if we have development of worker-owned businesses, if we have development of credit unions, of banking within the community, instead of sending our dollars out to Wall Street through, again, these Wells Fargo types, these Bank of America types, who are extracting money from us and giving not that much in return, we're going to have some control over our economy, and that requires that we have a broader base of ownership.
You cannot go through a Memphis City Council budget without the question of minority spend coming up. Doesn't matter what the subcontract, every division has a subcontract list. Every list is asked what the percentage minority is. And to be clear, we're actually also digging farther into, there are a lot of female-owned businesses and a lot of African-American-owned businesses, and we're trying to make sure that all the numbers go up. So when it comes to the budget season, we've actually been working really hard to make sure that the playing field is fair and equal and increasing. I think it also speaks, though, to a broader picture, because that's the short-term question. The longer-term question is continuing to build these minority businesses, build the city's business structure in terms of their long-term play. When you kind of come over to construction or even bond issuing, you see that there's so very few minority firms, and the ones that you can find quite literally are in New York or Chicago. So I don't want Memphis money to go outside of Memphis, so we keep it in Memphis, but that limits our number. We have to, as a long-term goal for our city, continue to build these numbers of these businesses, not just in, say, the landscaping world, but in the bond issuance world, in the HVAC world, and all these different opportunities. So you have your short-term goal where we ask questions literally every budget item. Martavius is always very, very good about that. We follow up on it. Then we have our long-term goal, which is creating competition for those contracts. Now, if you look at construction and you look at the different trades, many trades, when we bid things out, we have a 35% goal. Many trades, you can meet that objective. Landscaping, I know you can. But when you come into industries like HVAC, heating, ventilating, cooling, there's only one or two large firms that are minority owned. So I think in terms of the construction contracts, we have a lot of work to do to build that up over time. So it's not a question we can solve tomorrow, but it is a question, come to council, especially in budget. You sit there and listen to us, in 5 minutes you'll hear it.
I want to turn now to crime and safety, and I want to start, of course, switch back over to start with you this time, Frank. And the question, first, a little context, that almost every survey you do of voters and citizens in Memphis, no matter where you are, most affluent, least affluent, will say this is the #1 issue in the city. So I'm asking this question with that context, that we have been on pace this year to have more than 200 homicides. That's below the number, the record-breaking number in 2016, but it's still a worrisomely high figure. What can you do as a council member to address the murder rate and drive down other violent crime trends in both your district and the city? Start with you.
It's clearly the #1 issue. 2016, we were at 1,900 police officers. We're at 2,100. When we get to what the professionals say is the goal of 2,300, they say while that will not put a police officer on every corner, it will help us further implement Blue Crush. It will help us basically ease off some of the overtime stress that our officers have. It helps us fully implement our police tactics. We've put out quite literally hundreds and hundreds of Skycop cameras. It helps us catch criminals faster, keeps a lot of people honest. We have shot spotters that help the police direct towards where there's a potential problem. But the bottom line to it is, this is about people feeling safe in their homes, wanting to walk their dog in the neighborhood. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to feel safe. What I want to do is not just police, it's not just that, it can't be. It is things like how we fund Neighborhood Watch with our grant programs. It's how we clean up blight with our grant programs. When our houses and our public areas look clean and neat, people tend to take care of them. People feel safer. So when you get into that, then you get into, I think at the end of the day, when you take the Neighborhood Watch groups, you expand the homeowners associations. As we expand and promote that, then neighbors know neighbors. I don't think neighbors really know each other anymore. Everybody seems to be moving all the time. So when it comes to just police, no. But when it comes to safety, I believe that it's everybody's responsibility to get involved. Neighborhood Watch programs are a wonderful first start.
John, same question.
So, getting back to challenging presuppositions, read an interesting statistic recently. It said that 46% of the violence in Memphis is gang-related. I don't know how much you know about gangs or how they operate, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a reason why gangs are considered criminal enterprises. They are a business. They operate as a business. We wrote legislation specifically to address them as a business. These gangs form an underground economy that are providing needs that the straight economy or the regular economy is not providing in these areas. I've heard an interesting recent development. The gangs have they started styling themselves street organizations to remove some of the stigma, and now I've heard them styling themselves people's organizations, which is an interesting term, I'll say that much. But if we look at blight is a function of economics. If we look at poverty is a function of economics. Poverty ties almost directly to property crime. The numbers are 1 and 1. We had 1,900 officers in 2016. We had a high murder rate. We've got 2,100 officers in 2019. We've got a high murder rate. Guess what stayed the same in those 2 years? Our poverty rate. This violence is a function of an underground economy that relies on violence to settle its differences because it cannot go through legal channels. We eliminate that underground economy, we eliminate broad swaths of the crime in this city.
Marvin?
Thank you. I was taken aback when I heard the statistics we just quoted a number of times. In 2016, having 1,900 officers. In 2019, having 2,100 officers. But I also heard earlier that we had a net gain of 400 officers. By my math, that's a little off 200 officers. So it sounds like we had an attrition problem. Sounds like we need to make sure that we're actually listening to the police and trying to be competitive. I talked to the police. At a recent town hall event in Cordova, I stood outside and couldn't get in because I stood there talking to a couple of the officers. And they were a little bit frustrated. One was like, look, I'm on my way out the door. I've got another agency contacting me now. They're just not paying us enough. It's not competitive. They won't let us police. So he's extremely frustrated. So we've got to address the issue with the police precincts, the police officers. There's a problem when the council hasn't funded them a raise or pension increase until this year. When it's an election year, sounds like it's pretty convenient to pass that this year. So I've got a problem that we promote that, and the city spent millions of dollars recruiting officers from 2015 to 2019 with only a net gain of, we're hearing 200, but I think even the police association president has some different numbers. So we got to address that issue. So that's a big issue with safety. Also, I absolutely do support communities knowing communities. I support that because I've been in the community. I was at a neighborhood watch, a community association event last night for the Burlington area that is southeast Memphis. One of those areas that hasn't been getting the development. One of those areas where you have to ride by blighted houses and vacant buildings that have been there for many years, that are years down the road on the 3.0 plan. That's where I was. Those folks have the same concerns as the folks do in Cordova, as the folks do in East Memphis, as the same folks do in the Sea Isle area. I've gone to all those neighborhood associations, met with the Cordova Leadership Club. I met with the SIPNA, the Sea Isle Partners Association. So you got to be in there to really know what's going on. And they have hundreds of members, hundreds of homeowners in their community, and only a handful show up for the meetings. But what I also was blatantly absent were local officials. I did see in the Keswick-Stonington area where the assessor came out. I did see a police officer in some of those areas. But we didn't see other city officials. We got to get out of City Hall and go into the communities. That is where I think we need to understand these issues, where we can actually build legislation to help these communities become more safe.
A couple of times you all have referenced education as a key topic and an issue that you need to drive up the education levels to drive down poverty, I think one of you said. So this question concerns education and how the council and individual council members have no direct influence over the Shelby County schools. And yet, we all acknowledge that education is a key topic and raising the level of education is really key. So how would you seek that input on educational achievement and achievement of children in the schools? In your current role if you're reelected or your role if you're elected? Let's start with you this time.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so I have no choice but to be keenly engaged in education. I'm married to a lifelong educator. And I have to come home and listen to her. And she's been in every role, from a teacher to an assistant principal to a principal to working at the district office. And she sees it firsthand and has to wear that pain of what she's seeing happening in the education system. Our children are definitely being overlooked from a funding perspective. We don't have the programs. After school is costing parents a lot of money. Pre-K has not been funded to substantial levels. And yes, this council has been recently investing, again, convenient, but not effectively for long term. What I'm seeing, I also saw recently, University of Memphis recently produced a juvenile report about the number of violent crimes going up in juveniles. Crime in Memphis is actually going down, but violent crimes in juveniles is going up. And we don't arrest kids in Memphis, we detain them in juvenile court. And unfortunately, the number of, particularly again, that area we need to wrap our arms around, African American students, is 3 times, almost 4 times any other racial student. We've got to fix this problem. We've got to get in the school system now. We cannot wait. It's not good enough to say we've been trying for years. The people are tired of it. We let charter schools come in and run amok with very low performance historically. We have got to change the narrative. It is up to the council to change that narrative, and we can do that now.
John?
Education is interesting. The city ostensibly is out of the business of K through 12 education. But again, as Mr. White stated, we have issues with educational equity within Shelby County schools, most definitely. I am hesitant to go through the same set of issues that plagued us during the schools merger, which I'm sure would accompany any talk of the city taking the schools back over. And so my mind trends toward where else are we failing kids? And the immediate answer to me is outside the classroom. We need huge investment in youth training and after-school programs. We need fully funded pre-K. We need public child care to reduce the child care burden on many of our low-wage working parents. We need to look at this holistically and say, where can we hold influence outside of the classroom? And then as citizens, I definitely will be involved in the drive toward educational equity in the Shelby County schools going forward, and have been involved in the past. Don't let me mince my words there. It's something that's been on my mind. So with that, I think, yes, we've got to pour money into our underserved youth. We've got to make sure that we're investing in these kids and giving them something to go forward from, because if we don't, they will find their own trouble, and the results won't be good. Now, one thing I want to mention before I get off this, some mention was made of an increase in juvenile arrests. I find that increase very suspicious